This is a story about education, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. Good, it should. When I went to Brazil the second time for 10 months, I was teaching a group of students at the university in Rio who were going to become teachers themselves. These were advanced students. They'd already had many courses. Mine was supposed to be their most advanced course: electricity and magnetism, Maxwell's equations, the real stuff. The classroom overlooked the bay. I want you to remember that detail. It matters. Early on, I discovered a very strange phenomenon. I could ask a question, and the students would answer it immediately, perfectly, but then I'd ask what I thought was the same question, phrased slightly differently, and they'd stare at me blankly. Same subject, same concept, but different words, and suddenly they had nothing. Let me give you the specific example because it haunts me to this day. I was teaching about polarized light, and I gave every student a strip of Polaroid film. I explained how it works. It only passes light whose electric field vibrates in a certain direction. We played around with two strips, rotating them, watching the light get brighter and darker. Fine. Then I asked, how can you determine the absolute direction of polarization using a single strip of Polaroid? Nobody had any idea. I gave them a hint. Look at the light reflected from the bay outside. Nothing. Crickets. So I asked, have you ever heard of Brewster's angle? Yes, sir, they said, snapping to attention. Brewster's angle is the angle at which light reflected from a medium with an index of refraction is completely polarized. And which way is the light polarized when it's reflected? The light is polarized perpendicular to the plane of reflection, sir. They even knew that the tangent of the angle equals the index. They had it cold, every formula, every definition. I said, well, still nothing. They had just told me in perfect textbook language that light reflected from a surface like the bay outside their window would be polarized. They'd told me which direction it would be polarized. They knew every fact they needed, but they couldn't connect those words to the actual bay that was right there, sparkling in the sunlight, 10 feet from where they were sitting. When they heard light reflected from a medium with an index, they didn't know that meant a material such as water. The words in the textbook and the world outside the window existed in two completely separate compartments in their minds. They'd memorized the map, but had never looked at the territory. And after more investigation, I figured out what had happened. The entire educational system was based on memorization. Students would sit in lectures and take dictation. I attended one lecture at the engineering school where the professor said very slowly, two bodies are considered equivalent if equal torques will produce equal acceleration. And then he repeated the whole sentence so they could check their notes. Nobody discussed what it meant. Nobody mentioned that this is about why a door is harder to push when the weight is far from the hinges. It was just words, symbols to be copied and recited on the exam. And the exams confirmed the system worked. If you define works as students can reproduce sentences. One brilliant student at an entrance exam answered every question perfectly. He could derive the displacement of light through glass. So afterwards, I went up to him and asked a simple question. Can you give me an example of a diamagnetic substance? No. If this book were made of glass and I looked through it while tilting it, what would happen to the image? It would be deflected by twice the angle you've turned the book. You don't have that confused with a mirror? No, sir. He had just calculated in the exam that light through glass is displaced parallel to itself, which means the image slides sideways without rotating. But he couldn't recognize that his own calculation applied to an actual piece of glass. The exam question and the real question lived in different mental filing cabinets. This wasn't stupidity. These were bright, hard-working students. The system had trained them to be perfect recording devices, and they'd done exactly what the system asked. The tragedy is that nobody, not the students, not the professors, realized that something essential was missing. At the end of my stay, I was invited to give a talk about my experiences teaching in Brazil. I spoke to a big audience of students, professors, and government officials. I was nervous about saying what I really thought because I was a guest in their country, but I decided to be honest. I held up a physics textbook that was widely used in first-year university courses. This book has no experimental results anywhere in it, I said. I used the example of the textbook's description of how a ball bounces. It described the ball compressing and restoring its shape with all sorts of fancy terms, but it never said to try it. It never said to get a ball and actually watch what happens. This is not science, I said. This is learning to repeat words. I pointed out that the students could pass every exam and recite every formula and still have no connection between what's in their heads and the real physical world. It's as though a great dam has been built across a stream and the water is all backed up. The students are memorizing the water level behind the dam, but nobody has noticed that nothing is getting through to the other side. Some of the students afterward came up to me and said, but we can't do experiments. We don't have the equipment. I looked at them and said, you don't have any equipment. You have the bay. You have the sunlight. You have Polaroid strips I gave you. You have your own hands, which can feel how a door swings differently depending on where you push it. The whole world is your equipment. I've been thinking about this ever since, and here's what I believe. Education is not the transfer of words from a textbook through a student's eyes into their notebook and then back out onto an exam. That process can happen without a single moment of understanding. Real education is when the words connect to something, when Brewster's angle makes you look at the bay and suddenly see the world differently. The test of whether you've learned something isn't whether you can say it, it's whether you can use it, whether you can see it, whether when someone says, look at the bay, the whole beautiful machinery of physics that you've studied lights up and makes the light on the water means something. And if it doesn't, if you can recite every formula and still can't look out the window, then I'm sorry, but what you have isn't knowledge. It's a filing cabinet full of words, and all the exams in the world won't turn those words into understanding.